Welcome to another episode of the Future Founder Promise podcast. My name is Max. I am one of the co-founders of Stellate, and I am here with Tim, who you met in the other episode. And what we want to talk about today is the fact that our company is no longer called GraphCDN, like my sweater still says, but is called Stellate. We announced this recently, and we wanted to take you a little bit on our journey of why we decided to rename the company and how we actually went down that path. Tim, where did all of this start? Why did we decide to rename the company almost a year into founding it?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. So about actually, I remember, I think it was in February already last year. It's like over a year ago when one of our pre-seed investors, actually Max Clausen, he was mentioning, guys, what you're doing with the edge caching, that's great, but you gotta have a bigger vision. And we were always like, yeah, we will figure it out. There will be some things we will do. And we also intentionally decided the last year to focus on it because it's like caching is still one of the hardest problems in computer science, and building a good product around it isn't easy. So we spent a lot of time on refining that and had like incredible growth in the meantime. And now like a lot of companies using it, thousands of projects. But then we realized that so many of our customers have been asking for more features around it. So being in this proxy position between like a GraphQL API and the internet is quite a powerful position to be in. And for example, you can add like abuse protection in a certain sense. So GraphQL is a new tool, and is a new solution. What is it actually trying to solve? It wants to simplify data access and makes it actually approachable. There have been many approaches before GraphQL in the graph world, but also in the API world. There are so many protocols out there: Thrift, gRPC, Protobuf, but also OData, and so many other protocols that also try to make this easy. But GraphQL really struck a good balance, because GraphQL said no to a lot of fancy features that might have been nice, and that way it could actually be adopted in different languages. If you look at a GraphQL server implementation, it's actually not that little. Like you have tens of thousands of lines, for example, in GraphQL.js or in the other languages, just to have a like spec compliant server. And if you add more stuff, it will just get more complicated, right? So GraphQL is really this new technology, still new, for many companies that enables new things here. And such a new solution creates new problems and also needs new tooling to it. And so if you, for example, look at rate limiting, rate limiting is something most APIs, when they're in the REST world, most APIs these days, if they're like high scale production, they will have it. It's usually based on a request count and then just like an IP limit or something. You say this certain IP is only allowed to do 100 requests per second or something like that, or something that is humanly even possible. It depends who's the consumer. It could be a machine, could be a human. So for example, rate limiting is something where if you just say, I allow you to send 100 requests per second or minute, this is not sufficient anymore for GraphQL, because I could now send you a huge query that completely DDoSes your API, your server. We have talked to customers who were literally the API partners, people who want to query their data. They completely took down their backend with one query. And that is possible, right? Like with GraphQL, you need to be very careful. You should have pagination limits and so on. But like designing a good API in that sense is a lot of work. It's very powerful, right? That's why we do it. Want to give the front-end developers and app developers the power, but making that in a way that you don't shoot yourself in the foot is actually not trivial. And there are not yet too many best practices established and so on. So we see that is really a big need in the GraphQL ecosystem. There are many more unsolved problems. And so we have heard more and more about this from our customers. And when we talked to them, it turned out that many of them actually have two use cases. They want to use the API internally for their own app, but they also want to expose it to the world, for other people to be used. And it turns out that in order to do that, it's actually not that easy right now with GraphQL. And the reason is that, again, this is one problem, but it's a big problem space that we're also still exploring, actually. And so that's why we said, whoa, imagine we make it easier for anyone to expose their GraphQL API. That is quite powerful and would actually enable a lot of network effects. There's this memo from Jeff Bezos from 2002 where he told all his employees, okay, if you build a new project that doesn't expose an API, you're fired. And so that's how he implemented this, the API mandate back then. It's a iconic memo. I highly recommend Googling it, reading it. So he realized back in the days that this incredible business potential, right? And that is something that, in my view, still many business leaders don't necessarily focus on or understand. And one reason might also be that you don't know the specific use case, how people might use your API. That doesn't mean that they can't or that there wouldn't be a good use case. Like if we think about the App Store, Steve Jobs probably didn't know in the beginning how people would use it, but he knew it's a powerful technology. And so that's why we said this is something that we want to focus on. But now, how about we go a step further? And the step would be actually connecting a bunch of these APIs. Again, we're talking about GraphQL, so you have relations between data. And so that's why we want to connect the world's data. And and that's the new vision.
I think how I would summarize all of this is that there's sort of this dichotomy in GraphQL where you want the flexibility of GraphQL because that gives you a lot of power, right? As developers, you can go in and you can request the exact data that you need. It's just exactly what you asked for, which is incredibly nice to work with. And you can traverse these relations, you can traverse the entire graph of your data. But then that flexibility comes with the trade-off of now you have a really flexible API. And so if you just open that up to the world, if you expose it, then people can just send whatever queries they want. They can request whatever data they want. And often your backends aren't prepared to handle that. And there's lots of novel attack vectors in the way that GraphQL works with aliases and deeply nested queries and whatever you want that just could really mess up your backend and cause you to send millions of database reads to your database. And so I think if I were to summarize everything you just said, it's like there's that dichotomy in the flexibility of GraphQL. And we realize that there's a lot of tooling we can build to help people and help companies open up their APIs to the world. And I think once you're in that world where imagine every piece of data is opened up to the world as a GraphQL API. Every single company has a single graph of all of their data, which is, of course, a utopia and it's never going to happen. But if you're in that world, then it's almost a little bit ridiculous that all of those APIs aren't connected because you have all of these individual nodes and graphs that are completely separate, but the data is related, right? The user that signs up to your service, it's the same user as you have in Stripe, it's the same user as you have in Salesforce, it's the same user as you have in Intercom, right? All of this data, or most of it, is related somehow to other data. Most of it is related to other pieces of information that live in other APIs. And so we've been thinking about this idea of the global data graph. What if we just connected all of the world's APIs? And that's where we want to go. And if you think about that vision of connecting the world's data, then GraphCDN becomes a little bit too limiting of a name. And that's really where that whole conversation of renaming the company kicked off. It was really a matter of, look, we have this big idea, but if we're called GraphCDN, then we kind of have to keep building GraphQL CDN features, some of which we still need, right? Like in order to enable people to open up the GraphQL APIs, we are going to build a GraphQL CDN. That's always going to be a part of our product stack, but it's not going to be the only thing we do.
Yeah, exactly. And there are two things I also want to add here, which is one is like we learned a lot about naming, and I think we can go into that, like a lot of advantages and disadvantages about certain names and how to think about it, because it is a science and an art at the same time. I would even say more art than science. The other thing is that what we also observed is that originally GraphQL might not even have been designed to be exposed for different API consumers within Facebook. it has been designed within a like monolithic architecture where basically, let's say 90% of the problems that you have like in the web development, they were already solved. So it was like, this is like the API layer, but data access, trivial. How to store the data, permissions, and all of this stuff around it, right? They had that in place. Many people who start today, they don't. So I think there's also a shift happening how people use GraphQL. We see services like Hasura, also GraphQL back in the days, which were directly exposing a GraphQL interface or PostgreSQL GraphQL interface based on a database. And actually, those patterns work better than I think some people might have imagined. And there are a lot of like changes happening right now where GraphQL gets more accessible. And I think that also one of those points is actually making it accessible for other people. That is not necessarily how GraphQL has been designed initially, which doesn't mean that you can't, and it doesn't also mean that it's not a good idea, right? And now, as we're already using GraphQL as the API interface, I think it's a really powerful idea to think about. And then, yeah, about the naming, it's a huge topic. We could probably talk about it for hours. But yeah, I can just like start a bit how we thought about that in the beginning, and like how our journey has been to actually arrive at Stellate. That took a while. So I think even again, Max Clausen, one of our pre-seed investors, even mentioned quite early that he recommends renaming. I don't know when it was, but he said it quite early. I think it was like maybe a year ago already, and we were like, yeah. We will rename. We even said we wanted to keep the name because it has a big advantage. It says what the product does. It's a what name. GraphCDN. It has advantages because people will immediately understand it. Like that, and like a one sentence explanation, you immediately know what we do. The GraphQL CDN makes sense. Many people actually called us GraphQL CDN because the two are so similar. And the advantage is really, you don't need to do a lot of marketing around what does it mean. If we would call ourselves, I don't know, some random word that doesn't exist. Stellate actually, by the way, is a word that exists in the dictionary. You just need to do more work to explain it, right? But you have like the clean slate. You can just you have the white canvas, and you can put in the messaging you want. And so there are advantages, disadvantages. For the CDN name, one thing is that people have a very specific preconception what a CDN is and what it does. And usually, traditionally, a CDN, and that was actually the most explanation we needed to do, it's like take people from where they are at okay, CDN, static stuff, caching it at the edge, and where we are at. And what we did over the months is moving more and more away from just CDN. We introduced analytics. We're now introducing like breaking changes detection, those kind of things. And that doesn't really have anything to do with a content delivery network. And then I was actually checking how does, for example, Akamai call themselves, right? Like the biggest CDN. They still have the biggest market share, although there are other CDN companies a lot in the media. Akamai is still the biggest, actually. And they, if you look in the Wikipedia article, it's not like they are a CDN and those are their products. They say Akamai is a huge technology company. Part of it is a CDN. They also have security. They have these other things, right? So it's not even necessarily anymore that you say CDN is like the bigger category and we have smaller things underneath. It's really CDN is one of the things. And that's where I also realized, okay, the name might be a bit misleading. And also, again, we have a whole new situation with GraphQL. It needs quite different tooling, actually, if you really do it in a GraphQL native way, that it like really fits it. And there, the name was just a bit too narrow, too limiting. So I think that in the beginning that helped us a lot because people immediately got, okay, that's the thing. And now, and also we knew that we don't just want to introduce a new name for sake of having a new name. There needs to be a reason. And that's why we took our time. and did more research and saw, like, in the last couple of months, we actually thought a lot about what other direction do we want to go into, or how can we expand from here. And that's also the beautiful message that I want to get across here. We're not pivoting. We're extending the vision. That's really important. So the edge caching stays. That's like still important, and we want to grow that out. It's just the edge caching is one problem, and we believe that the problem needs to be solved as a whole. There's a lot of fragmented tooling in the ecosystem, and some tooling works better together, some less. We believe that the whole GraphQL experience still has a lot of potential. That's why we're also investing in community meetups now, and building out the new graphical. In case you don't know, I created actually the GraphQL playground back in the days, but didn't work on it since I left Prisma, and now we want to so the GraphQL playground got merged into graphical, and now we want to build the new graphical, which is playground level 9000. So it will be really awesome. And we just believe that there is still a lot of work that will make GraphQL successful, that is necessary to make GraphQL successful. And if we actually think about it, what made GraphQL successful, I think it is to a big part the tooling that did the right job, right? Without graphical, not sure if GraphQL would have succeeded like this. The fact that people, why is graphical so important? Because you get this quick feedback. I try something out and I immediately get feedback, and like that I can immediately understand the thing. It's the quickest way to understand GraphQL is actually trying it out, right? Not just reading a bunch of articles, which is also great, but literally trying it out, and you will immediately get, that's the connection. If I write this query, that's the response. This connection you first need to establish, right? If you have never seen it, how should you know? But if you just write a bunch of queries, you will suddenly see. Anyway, I'm going back from that route. I think, we just realized there's a lot that needs to happen, and that then the GraphCDN name was just too limiting. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the thing I appreciate about our team is that we have a really high bar for developer experience. And every single time, I remember Tim last week had to deploy a GraphQL API, a random little GraphQL API that returned data about cities, I think. And after 1.5 hours, we went for lunch, and Tim was ranting for 15 minutes about how difficult it was to deploy this very simple Node.js GraphQL API that wasn't even backed by any database or anything. It was just a little bit of code to return something as GraphQL. And so I think, to me, it's very obvious that the developer experience of getting things out into the world is way too bad. It could be so much better. And the part that we're taking there that we're probably going to tackle is making GraphQL and building GraphQL APIs much nicer as a full stack experience. And that's just a part of making sure that every piece of data is exposed as an open GraphQL API, right? Going back to the earlier point, the more open GraphQL APIs there are, the bigger eventually the global data graph is going to be. And so it's on us as a company to make sure that GraphQL is in a place where it's absolutely the right tool for the job, and it works really well for the purposes that people want to use it for. Now, to go back to the naming point, so we have this what name, the GraphCDN, which very specifically tells people what we do. Even at the beginning, it was already a little bit limited because CDNs are generally associated with static content, and GraphQL is very dynamic, and so people didn't even realize that you could cache GraphQL in a CDN. And now we're going to be called Stellate. How did we go from GraphCDN to Stellate? Where did that name come from?
Yeah, so as many things, we took it actually quite methodically. So we didn't all get high and have that epiphany. So what we did in this case was actually work with a naming agency, a really fantastic agency called 100 Monkeys, who came up with names like Okta or Waymo. So they really did some big names out there. An SF-based agency, really awesome people. And so what they're doing, they have quite a systematic approach. They have really interesting process. When I saw their process, I was like, okay, they're professionals, they know what they're doing. They first have this intake process. So what they do, they work with up to, I think, 3 design partners basically from the company that they decide and like say what they want. Like they realize you cannot work with a group of 10, 20 people at the same time. There will be too many different opinions and feelings about the name. You won't be able to find a name that everyone loves. That's just not possible. And the initial reaction for quite a few renamings recently in the ecosystem not necessarily has been that positive, but now the name is like the name around, right? I remember some reactions around the renaming from Zeit to Vercel. Some people were like, "Oh, what is this?" But now it's like the name, right? Like everyone knows what it is. Like they have a strong brand around it. Anyway, so they have this intake process, and they first want to understand what's important. So they have like few points, and they say only choose a few or only 2. You cannot always have everything. For example, having the .com. These days, if you don't make up some crazy soup of words or like letters, it's nearly impossible to get the .com. The trademark situation obviously needs to be clean, but how clean should it be? No trademark at all, or just trademarks in different categories? And so there are just a few different things that people are looking for, and you have to choose a few. What was interesting, which I learned from the 100 Monkeys, is that these days the .com, like having a strong brand versus having a .com, the strong brand, in the opinion of the 100 Monkeys, is more important. People will Google you anyway, and so then doesn't make too much a difference. .com is still awesome, and everyone wants the .com, no question. So yeah, so we first have this intake process, and then they just go wild. They use analogies from biology, from architecture, from whatever. They maybe make up some words, but also some words that are very rare in the English language. Actually, the English language has a lot of words. I think 5 times as many as the German language, like over 100,000 or something. It's incredible.
A lot.
Yeah, and so then in that phase, you give them like a bit of feedback. Like they come with this list backs, like a list of 10 of 10 names, and or even more. It's like depends how much they research, and you give the feedback. You work with them on that, and so again they have a second round, and with that feedback. And the feedback is actually what's quite important here. Is the feedback is individual. It's not with the group anymore that you had initially for the intake, but it's really individual, because otherwise you would bias each other too much. If there's like a strong voice in the room, maybe someone who feels something, they might not say it, or they get influenced. So really raw, you get the name without knowing what the other people think, which I think makes a lot of sense, which is something we can learn from in many other aspects. Like if we have meetings and want to do brainstormings, just doing that first, like in a more individual manner. And so then we have another iteration. And so basically with that, we had over like 20 names, I think. And there were many aspects to it, like, is this name something like, I think, to be honest, the one of the most important points was really, what is our first association with it? Is it a good association with the name? And there were a lot of exciting names out there. But actually, Stellate now is a short name. Stellate, 2 syllables. And it has this association with stellar, the stars. It's something very modern. That's like the kind of association people usually get, and that's a positive thing. That's what we want. We are building a new company. It's a new thing. It's something innovative that is changing also the world. That's our goal. So I think in that sense it fits really well. So it was funny because we had this list of 5 names. I kind of felt the whole time that Stellate, that's a thing. And we just, that name I don't feel so good about, That was the last name really left. And we didn't know actually what we would do if we wouldn't be able to get, like register a trademark or something. That would be, like if there's like a trademark already registered in our industry. We didn't even know what to do then, because this was just the name, like, yes, this feels really good. This is the name. that everyone wanted, and then we chose it.
I think something that was also really important throughout this whole process is that we realized pretty early on that we want sort of an empty vessel name. We very specifically went for a name that doesn't have a lot of meaning associated with it. Stellate is the word that means star-shaped. It means something in the form of a star, which is a nice connotation. And kind of, if you think about the global data graph, every node in the graph sort of looks like a star, right? You feel all of these edges going out. But that was the extent of the connection to the specific things we do. It was meant as a name that we could fill with our brand, that we could fill with our ideas, that we could fill with ourselves, rather than a name that told us what to do. We could tell the name what to do is, I think, the big difference. And I think that's very similar to what many companies do. There's many options of how you could go about this. There's companies that call themselves, like Green Frog, for example, that choose two-word names. There's very specific names like Big Ass Fans. There's all kinds of names out there. And we really wanted one that was an empty vessel that we could fill with our meaning, that was short and we could just say it and it was there. And so that's why we liked Stellate so much. It had a positive connotation. It had nice meaning that sort of tied into what we were trying to do with this star-shaped idea. It sounded great, and it was short and sweet and one word and just Stellate. You got it. That was really important to us, and I think something that I personally didn't realize before we went on this whole renaming journey with the 100 Monkeys. I had no idea that there was such a thing as an empty vessel name. I had no idea that people could choose so many different categories of names, and I think that's been really fascinating. And I'm also very happy that we landed on Stellate. It's a fantastic name.
Yeah, agreed. And there was even another concept that I have to borrow from Chess here that I can apply to names, which is there can be a name where you immediately get the punchline with a name. There can also be a name where you don't know, okay, cool. And it's one more step, but then you're oh. And so you can choose, right? It's not that one is wrong or the other is right. But I think we had this tendency to have a bit more name where it's a bit more whole, and what I said with chess there is one is checkmate in 1. You can see it. Yeah, that's the move. Or checkmate in 2 or 3. When it's a few more steps to see what is the punchline, what's the point. And I think that's the nice thing. I think also they have a good balance, actually. Yeah.
I love that idea. Tim, for all of you listening, is a big chess fan, and so you'll often hear him speak in chess analogies. I'm very used to it now. If you ever speak with him, he has a great blog post actually on his blog about smothered mates and how that ties into startup land that I would really recommend you check out. I would love to also talk a little bit more about the practical processes of renaming. So we settled on this name Stellate. How did we go from actually settling on the name Stellate to it now being live? What were the steps along the way that we had to walk through?
Yeah, so one thing to note is that when it comes to trademarks, when it comes to potential trademark infringement, the company name is completely irrelevant. So I could, not sure if we could call our company Apple, but you basically can call your company whatever you want as long as it's not taken in that state. What really matters is how you call your product. That's the point where you need trademark support. So you could theoretically just keep your old company name if you wanted to, so it doesn't really matter too much, but the product is actually the point where you would then infringe potentially some trademarks. So what you have to do in the beginning, also 100 Monkeys, they do a preliminary test of and a check how does the trademark situation look like. And so we worked with trademark lawyers then afterwards to really do a deep dive, a full search. And what you do, there are a bunch of registrars where you can search for certain trademarks. And trademarks are usually defined for certain parts of the industry. You don't want to define the trademark on everything. That doesn't work. You need to have a certain narrow scope. The same with a patent. You cannot just patent breathing or something. That doesn't work. Although sometimes patents are a bit broader than they should be. But anyway, so you you need to figure that out. And I think that's the most important part. The domains for sure, right? Just getting all the domains. And I think we currently have our renaming, like the renaming is, there are just so many things you need to look at, right? For example, all the content, everywhere where the company is mentioned, all of these things. But I think that the basis is really figuring out the trademark situation. Once that is solid, like, okay, I can do this. Which is funny because many startups, they just choose a name and create a website, and that's their product. They don't do a trademark search for side project or something, which I was just realizing we didn't do this for GraphCDN. We just Googled it, didn't exist. Okay, sounds good. And yeah, so I think, but in this stage now, as the company is further ahead, I think it just makes a lot of sense to get that safe, because you don't want to switch around again and want to obviously make that transition as smooth as possible. And also what that means for the product is that all old domains, everything will still work, obviously, forever. Like if you have like an app domain or something, all of that stuff will still work forever. It's just that both domains will just work in parallel from now on. So obviously everything has to be compatible, making sure that all the redirects are properly defined and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like minute detailed tasks that we're gonna have to do. Like the docs are on a separate subdomain. All of these subdomains, we gotta move them around. Our email setup, our Google authentication. Like there's a bunch of like minute tasks to moving the name, but the most important part really is making sure that you can get the trademark and that you can get the domains that you'd like, so that people can find you and people can visit you, and the social media handles if you can. I'm curious to see what we're gonna miss, because we have this long list internally of like 100 things we have to update with a new name. I'm sure we're gonna miss some things. I'm sure half a year from now somebody's gonna go, you still have the wrong company name there, and we'll be like, oh damn it, we totally forgot about that. I can already see that happening. So to summarize what we just talked about, we are going to unlock the world's data by building the global data graph. We're going to try and connect all of the world's open GraphQL APIs into the global data graph. And our first step towards that vision is we want to make open GraphQL APIs ubiquitous. We want to make it much simpler to expose your GraphQL API to the world so that others can integrate with you. And there's a lot of tooling that we need to build to make that happen. And as part of that, we realized that the name GraphCDN was a very specific name. It was very specific to what we were doing at the time, the edge caching, which we're still going to do, but it's just going to be a part of what we do, not everything we're going to do. And so we went on this journey with a naming agency and figuring out how do we want to call this company. And we ended up choosing the name Stellate, which is an empty vessel and doesn't have any specific connection to what we do, except for the fact that it means star-shaped, and the graph has star-shaped nodes, which is kind of nice. But other than that, it's just a name that we can fill with our own brand, which we're very excited about. I can't wait to get rid of this sweater, actually. It still says GraphCDN on it. I have to tape something over it, replace it with Stellate, and that is our new company name. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Anything else you wanted to mention?
Oh, I think just come join us to build the global data graph.
Perfect. There you go. Well, we're hiring. So head to stellate.co/careers to check out the open roles we're hiring across all of our departments. We also announced as part of this rename that we've raised a $25 million Series A and a $5 million seed round. And we're going to be expanding across every department and trying to build, as part of trying to build this global data graph, we're going to be hiring everything. So if you are excited about working on the global data graph in the GraphQL ecosystem, come hit us up. We're hiring across all departments. Check out our careers page. Thank you, Tim, for joining me. Thank you for taking the time and walking us through this whole renaming journey from GraphCDN to Stellate. I'm excited for you all to finally see the new name, and I will see you in the next episode of the Future Founder Promise podcast. Bye.
Bye.